Hey everybody, I'm Matt and welcome back to Offbeat Bloom. As a refresh, the last thing we talked about was doing the math of putting together our budgets, and today we're going to talk about using that math to track how well we're actually keeping our budget. Now let's talk about which tools are available for us to use. There are obviously things like Excel or even paper journals that can help you to keep track of what you're spending. There are also free apps like Mint out there that you can try. Though as a warning, a lot of those sorts of things that are free tend to take the data that they're picking up on you to advertise things for you to spend against which probably aren't in your budget. Whatever tool that you end up using, I highly recommend that tool be something that is easy to maintain, easy to be consistent with, and easily read. Now, one of the most important concepts in this entire idea of tracking our budgets is accountability. Maybe you're like me and you're single and you live alone. Your accountability is entirely to yourself. But if you have a family or you have roommates, your accountability for your budget also extends to how it impacts them. If you aren't keeping up with your budget, that means that you might not be able to meet all of the responsibilities of things you've agreed to do. And to the extent we're able to control this, none of us wants to be the person who can't pay our share. So how do we keep accountable? Well, there are a few ways that might help. First, there is the old envelope method. Now, this is very, very manual, and it requires that you have cash, which is kind of a weird thing to do in modern times, especially with our current circumstances where most of us are spending almost all of our money electronically. But the envelope method in its basic form says that you have a series of envelopes that you've allotted. Generally, this allotted group of envelopes covers most of your wants and your excess spending outside of the stuff that's normally taken out of your bank account or paid electronically. Generally, it covers things like food spending, going shopping for clothes, all those sorts of things. The things that fall outside of that needs bucket we've talked about in previous videos. One way is to say that at the end of the week or the month, I want to make sure that I have X amount saved. And I'm going to say that $50 of that might go to buying a really good meal or a video game or something that I wouldn't normally buy for myself, but now I can reward myself. Whatever the reward is, it needs to be big enough that you appreciate it and small enough that it's not impacting your budget. One thing I do is I actually separate. I have 3 bank accounts, one for saving, one for wants, one for needs. All of my bills run against that needs account or my credit card, which the cash sits in the needs account and I just move it to the credit card once those bills hit. But what this allows me to do is have a want credit card, and that's what I use if I want to buy food from a restaurant or buy a video game. All of that comes off of that one card, and it helps make sure I know exactly how much I can afford and I don't spend over that. As a note, on that want card, you might want to make sure that you have your overdraft protections on just in case you miscalculate, but I highly recommend that you pay close attention to that account. Have it on an app, something that you can see and check in on regularly. Though, and this is important, banking information electronically can be delayed by how quickly the person using your card settles the transaction. One thing I've recommended to people, especially those who lived in highly unbanked areas, maybe rural communities, is what's called a reloadable card. You can go to Walmart or similar places. You can take cash, you can put it onto a card that's usable pretty much anywhere, and use that as your constraint because that card won't let you spend more than, let's say, $100 if that's what you've put on it. The tools you need to use for your own personal accountability depend on how much you trust yourself not to spend money that you're not supposed to. This also might include suppressing or getting rid of advertisements on certain websites where you know you're really likely to click on the ad and then buy the thing. I know that I'm kind of guilty of this on Instagram sometimes. They're really good algorithmically at figuring out things I might want to buy. And this accountability thing matters because if you aren't accountable to yourself, it does not matter how good a budget you build, and it does not matter how much you put into tracking it, because you won't actually feel it if you fail to keep up with your budget. So what happens once we actually do have whatever device or app or system we're going to use to keep track of our spending? What happens when I've gathered all my information from my bank spending, from my receipts, and all of my other places, and I go and sit down to compare how I actually did for a month compared to what I thought my budget was? The first thing you need to do is exactly what we did when we made the budget, which is check your numbers. Make sure that you're capturing all of your spending. If you spend a lot on credit cards and debit cards, make sure you're pulling those transaction registers. Usually this is available online. If you use a lot of cash, make sure you're keeping physical receipts so that you can use those to help your tracking. In general, you want to use the same sources to pull in your data month to month or week to week that you did to build your budget in the first place, with the understanding that you also want to make sure that you're capturing everything. So if you were only using bank information and you realize you spend a lot of cash, you also need to include receipts even if those weren't part of your original budget. Once I feel that my actual numbers are good, I'm going to sit down and compare those to my budget and see how well they mesh up. Now, what does this mean? Well, at the top level, it means if I said I was going to spend this much, that's actually what I spent or less. That's always the goal with a budget. Spend as much or less than what you planned to. But you have specific goals. You had goals that involved saving and hitting certain marks in terms of only spending so much in wants. Did you meet those? Well, you have to organize your actual data to match up so that you can say, well, I spent more on video games than I intended to, but my electric bill came in lower. It's okay if there's some movement between the buckets so long as you're comfortable with it and it's not setting back whatever your long-term goal is. If you happen to spend a little more in wants, but you're keeping up with your vacation goal that you were planning for, then you're probably okay. But if your electric bill came in high, that might be a problem and you'll need to adjust going forward to keep up. This brings us to our next point, which is checking our goals. When we started out, we set goals. Now, some of those were based on things we were really sure of, and some of them we were guessing at. We can now use real data, actual transactions, to help us see if those were good assumptions. One thing to look at is, why are we doing differently than our goal? Is it because we set the wrong goal? Did we think that we were really bringing in a certain amount of income when we actually consistently bring in less? Okay, that's fine. We just have to adjust our goals and our budget accordingly to reflect that. And again, this is an ongoing process. You're never actually done with a budget. You might complete certain goals within your budget. You might hit certain long-term goals that you had or vacations, things like that. But the reality is that we're always going to be looking for the next thing we want to improve. And at the very least, we want to keep track and make sure we're keeping up with what we want out of our life when it comes to our budget and our money. We talked a little bit about some of the tools that are out there or ways that you can track your money. We talked about accountability and how important that is to succeeding in any part of this exercise. And we talked about how to actually sit down with your actual numbers and compare and adjust your goals as you go. Next week, we're going to be talking about the last section in all of this, which is things to keep in mind. It's sort of a potpourri, a general bucket of things that I really didn't have a perfect place to put anywhere else, or were just sort of tangents in other videos. These are going to be things that tripped me up when I was getting started trying to keep my own personal budget, and things that I've learned from others to avoid. So look forward to that one next week. And with that, my name is Matt. This is Offbeat Bloom. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to keep up with us, go follow on Twitter at Offbeat Bloom. You can subscribe on YouTube. Also, click the notification button, like the video, comment. And comments, really, I do want to try to participate in. So if you have any comments or questions, please drop in there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you could have watched it a week earlier over on our website, offbeatbloom.com. And if you're watching on either of those places, you could have seen it even earlier, a week earlier than the website, over on Patreon at the $5 tier. If that's something you're interested in, please feel free to do that. And with that, thank you for your time. My name is Matt, and this is Offbeat Bloom. Bye, buds.